Story number 1.
The reflection in the mirror. In a quiet, unassuming suburban neighborhood, there was a legend about an antique mirror. It was no ordinary mirror. Its ornate gilded frame was intricately carved with strange symbols, and its glass had a faint, smoky hue, as if it had absorbed centuries of secrets. The mirror was said to be cursed, passed down through generations, always bringing misfortune to its owners. Some claimed it was a portal to another world, while others believed it housed a malevolent spirit. Regardless of the truth, one thing was certain: those who owned it eventually vanished without a trace. Sarah, a young woman with a passion for vintage decor, had always been drawn to the mysterious and the macabre. When she stumbled upon the mirror at a flea market, she felt an inexplicable pull toward it. The vendor, an elderly man with sunken eyes and a raspy voice, warned her not to buy it. "This mirror carries a darkness," he said, his voice trembling. "It's not meant for the living." But Sarah, ever the skeptic, laughed it off. She handed him the money and took the mirror home, eager to add it to her collection. At first, the mirror seemed harmless. It hung in her living room, its smoky glass reflecting the soft glow of the afternoon sun. Sarah admired its beauty, running her fingers over the intricate carvings on the frame. But as the days passed, she began to notice something strange. Her reflection didn't always match her movements. Sometimes it would blink when she didn't. Other times it would smile at her when she wasn't smiling. She tried to brush it off as a trick of the light, but the unease lingered. One night, Sarah woke up to the sound of faint tapping. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew louder as she lay in bed, her heart pounding. She grabbed her phone and followed the noise to the living room where the mirror hung. The room was dark, but the mirror seemed to shimmer with an unnatural light. As she approached, her reflection appeared, but it wasn't her. The figure in the mirror had hollow eyes and a twisted grin. It raised a hand and pressed it against the glass, the surface rippling like water. Sarah stumbled back, her breath catching in her throat. She threw a blanket over the mirror and retreated to her bedroom, telling herself it was just a nightmare. But the next morning, the blanket was on the floor and the mirror was uncovered. Her reflection stared back at her, normal once again. Relieved, she convinced herself it had all been in her head. Days turned into weeks, and the strange occurrences grew worse. Sarah would catch glimpses of her reflection moving on its own, walking away when she stood still, or whispering words she couldn't hear. She began to feel like she was being watched, even when she was alone. Her friends noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the way she jumped at every sound, but she couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. How could she explain something so unbelievable? One evening, Sarah decided enough was enough. She grabbed the mirror, determined to smash it and end the nightmare. But as she raised it above her head, her reflection lunged forward, its hands breaking through the glass. Cold, bony fingers wrapped around her wrists, pulling her into the mirror. She screamed, but no sound came out. The last thing she saw was her own face, grinning back at her from the other side. The next morning, Sarah's neighbor noticed her front door was ajar. Concerned, she went inside and found the house empty, except for the mirror hanging perfectly in place. When she looked into it, she saw Sarah's reflection, her eyes wide with terror, mouthing the words, "Help me." The neighbor left the house and never spoke of what she saw. The mirror remained, waiting for its next victim.
Story number 2.
The Whispering Walls. In a small, forgotten town nestled deep within the woods, there stood an old, decrepit house. It had been abandoned for decades, its windows shattered, its roof sagging under the weight of time. Locals called it the Whispering House, and they avoided it like the plague. But for Emma, a curious urban explorer, it was the perfect subject for her next YouTube video. One crisp autumn evening, Emma arrived at the house with her camera equipment. The air was thick with the scent of decaying leaves, and the wind carried an eerie silence. As she stepped inside, the floorboards groaned beneath her feet, and the walls seemed to lean in closer, as if watching her every move. She began filming, narrating her exploration with forced cheerfulness. "This is it, guys, the infamous Whispering House. Let's see what secrets it's hiding." As she ventured deeper, the atmosphere grew heavier. The air felt colder, and her breath formed visible clouds. She noticed strange symbols carved into the walls, their meanings lost to time. Then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, like the rustle of dry leaves. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is someone here?" The whispers grew louder, overlapping into a cacophony of voices. They seemed to come from the walls themselves, murmuring in a language she couldn't understand. Emma's heart raced as she tried to rationalize the sounds, wind, maybe, or her imagination. But the voices were too distinct, too deliberate. She aimed her camera at the walls, hoping to capture the phenomenon. The whispers intensified, and the symbols on the walls began to glow faintly. Suddenly, the camera's screen flickered, and the whispers turned into screams, agonized, desperate screams that echoed through the house. Terrified, Emma dropped the camera and bolted for the door. But the house seemed to shift around her, the hallway stretching endlessly. The walls closed in, the whispers now deafening, and the symbols burned brighter. She stumbled and fell, her vision blurring as the screams consumed her. When she awoke, she was outside, lying on the cold ground. The house loomed before her, silent and still. Her camera lay beside her, its screen cracked and dark. Relieved, she grabbed it and fled, vowing never to return. But that night, as she reviewed the footage, her blood ran cold. The video showed her wandering the house, but the whispers were clear, and so were the faces. Shadowy figures emerged from the walls, their eyes hollow, their mouths twisted in silent screams. The video ended with a final chilling shot. Emma, standing motionless in the center of the room as the walls closed in around her. She never uploaded the video, but sometimes, late at night, she hears the whispers again, faint but unmistakable, and she knows the house is waiting for her to return.
Story number 3.
The open window. Lena had always been a light sleeper, so when she woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of her bedroom window creaking open, she sat up instantly. Her heart pounded as she stared at it. She was sure she had locked it before bed. The night breeze fluttered the curtains, and for a long moment there was only silence. Then, the closet door creaked. Something was inside. Lena's breath hitched. Her mind raced. Did she lock the front door? Had someone broken in? She reached for her phone on the nightstand, but just as she grabbed it, a footstep. Software, just beyond the closet door. She could hear breathing now. Shallow, ragged. They knew she was awake. She didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at the closet, heart hammering. Then, Slowly, so slowly, the door handle turned. A quiet click, and the door began to open. Lena's body screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. She was frozen, her pulse deafening in her ears. The door inched open just enough for the darkness inside to yawn wide. Then, a whisper, right at the edge of the dark. "I see you!" Lena bolted. She ran for the hallway, yanking her bedroom door open and sprinting for the front door. Behind her, she heard footsteps rushing after her. Something fast. She fumbled with the lock, yanked the door open, and threw herself outside. The cold air hit her like a shock, and she turned, expecting to see something be at the door. But her bedroom was empty. The window? Closed. The closet door? Shut. Had she imagined it? Her shaking hands told her no. And then, she noticed it. The footprints. Bare, wet footprints, leading from her closet to her bed. And then, back to the window.